In the past month, I read dozens of Batman comics from various eras to grasp the true essence of his character. But it's a bit complicated because over the years he has been a criminal genius, a gangster, a ridiculous villain who uses umbrellas as weapons, an heir, a sadist, a joke, a real monster. But I discovered that he has been greatly underestimated. Like me, when you first saw the Penguin, you likely couldn't believe that this seemingly helpless character could be one of Batman's greatest foes. Yet his stories are perfectly understandable when read. It's about a criminal mastermind who rivals the Riddler. In fact, in this panel, even Bruce Wayne says that Oswald is smarter than him. But in addition to being a calculating genius, he's also an extremely cruel person, even to those he claims to love. He is a true monster, not because of his appearance, but because he lacks the ability to feel empathy. This is when you realize that being underestimated is the Penguin's greatest quality. This not only causes his enemies to accidentally lower their guard, but is also the great driving force behind Oswald's motivations. A boy who grew up yearning for the power, attention, and recognition that his deformed body denied him, and who eventually unleashed all this resentment he had stored up in Gotham City, thus becoming one of the most iconic villains of the Dark Knight in all of history. But how did he go from being this eccentric and almost ridiculous villain to this gangster we see in his series? In this video, we will analyze the best stories ever published about the Penguin to gain an in-depth understanding of his evolution. I'm Go, the Geek Monitor, and today we'll be taking the Penguin extremely seriously. Are you tired of those horrible microwave pizzas? Yes. Would you like to live an authentic Italian experience of pure flavor? Yes. The Penguin first appeared in Detective Comics number 58 in 1941, just 2 years after the creation of Batman. And in this version, he was an eccentric, cunning, and smiling character who managed to carry out a series of robberies and convince the Gotham City Police Department that Batman and Robin had turned into criminals. In those times, Batman still didn't have this great gallery of villains that he has today. So its creators, Bob Kane and Bill Finger, created new characters in each issue and took inspiration from wherever they could. According to what Kane himself said, the biggest inspiration for creating the Penguin was the mascot that the Cool Cigarette Company had at the time. But Kane doesn't seem to be telling the whole story, as there are many elements of the Penguin that we can also find in a Dick Tracy villain named Broadway Bates, who was introduced 8 years earlier. It's worth remembering that in those times, comics were economical products aimed at children, so issues like continuity or borrowing various elements from another character were not considered as important as they are today. Despite the odds, the Penguin stood out from his debut issue. Perhaps due to his appearance, a mix between the absurd and the elegant, and this cunning personality that challenged Batman from a more intellectual than physical standpoint. Note that the Riddler, another villain who intellectually challenges Batman, appeared 8 years later. However, these early appearances laid much of the groundwork for what we know today as the Penguin character. Not only did they establish him as a criminal genius through various comics where he commits very creative crimes using bird and umbrella themes as weapons, but they also tell us about Oswald's desire to be recognized and taken seriously. We can particularly see this in Batman Comics 17, where the Penguin enters a conference where they mention Batman's most dangerous villains. However, to his surprise, Oswald was not among them. Despite being a wanted criminal, he was so greatly offended that he couldn't help but raise his hand in front of everyone and ask why he wasn't on the list. To which the presenter replied that the Penguin was not very creative as he only used umbrellas as weapons, so Oswald in that comic began to use fishing rods, rifles, and other sports accessories as his main weapon just to show people that he could. Ironically, Batman caught him with an umbrella at the end of the comic. This is not the only instance of such an occurrence. As in Batman 155, we see how the Penguin has retired from crime. However, he did not hesitate to return when a group of people tell him they don't believe he can beat Batman. The tone of these stories is more comedic because in general the Batman stories of those years were like that. However, they established the foundations well for the character's future development. Moving a bit away from the comics, the character would become extremely popular with the general public thanks to the 1966 Batman series starring Adam West, where actor Burgess Meredith brought this villain to life, focusing entirely on the eccentric and extravagant details of the character. Remember that this series sought to exploit this camp aesthetic and absurd situations to create its own style of comedy, so the Penguin also went down this line. His character worked so well in this adaptation that it is said that the writers preferred his character over others and sought to record with Burgess as much as possible. His character also appeared with the Joker in the Scooby-Doo movies years later. After the series cancellation, the Penguin was gradually used less in the comics, since Batman was going through a transformation process where his stories returned to being dark and detective-like, so an eccentric character like the Penguin seemed to no longer have a place in these types of stories. But every now and then, some writers venture to do something interesting with the character, like this story from 1984. Journalist Vicky Bale is surprised to see the photo she accidentally took of the Penguin, as the low angle and low lighting highlighted certain heavy shadows on him that made him look more threatening and less comical than before. This happens in the comic Penguin pieces, where we see that Oswald is tired of not being taken seriously, so he threatens Vicky Bale to take some pictures of him. You see, I've never received the recognition that my criminal genius deserves. Joker and the others, they're all second-rate talkers compared to me. I've always been portrayed in the media as clumsy, insignificant, and constantly sorted by Batman. I ask you, Miss Bale, have any of the others had better results against him? And consider this, in every confrontation, at least I've completed 2 or 3 brilliant crimes before a Batman victory. I'm more than my image, Miss Bale. The inner man transcends the shell of my appearance. I want you to capture that essence in photographs and display them for all the mockers to see. Vicky refuses despite the threats, but without Oswald realizing, she manages to take this photograph, which captures exactly what the Penguin claims to be. This comic is one of the last stories we see of this classic version of the Penguin who has the outfit, the one who uses explosive miniatures, the one who flies using his umbrella and leaves clues for Batman to find. The character was later reimagined as a gangster-like white-collar criminal who operates between the legal and corrupt, exploiting market opportunities. A great story where we can see the Penguin in this role is found in the comic No Man's Land, a story in which Gotham City is devastated by an earthquake and abandoned by the United States government. There was a debate over whether to surrender the city. Meanwhile, criminals battled for control of various neighborhoods and territories. However, Oswald took advantage of this, seeing the catastrophe as a business opportunity. Using contacts outside the city, the Penguin began to profit from people's needs, smuggling supplies and selling things like food and ammunition to both the police and the villains. In this comic, we see the Penguin in his most strategic facet in a story where he took advantage of the chaos to strengthen his position and expand his power, showing us that his main weapon was never the umbrellas, but his mind. In fact, in this comic, Bruce Wayne says that the Penguin is smarter than him. In this story, the Penguin is released from jail and decides to refrain from committing crimes openly. Bruce, concerned, tells Robin that Cobblepot is the brightest and smarter man he has ever fought against. Robin can't believe it if Batman has always defeated him, so Bruce explains the following to him. I understand obsessions more, I'm aware of mine, and I make them work most of the time. The Penguin has a fixation with Batman, and I keep him busy in an intellectual duel that prevents him from using his scams elsewhere. At least I've done it so far. According to Bruce, it's not that he's smarter than Oswald, but rather the Penguin gets more consumed by his obsessions. In this story, which we see in the Triumphant Penguin saga of 1992, Oswald begins to manipulate the stock market and becomes so dangerous that at one point in the plot he takes away Bruce Wayne's own mansion. And everything works out very well in this story until Oswald realizes that money doesn't matter much to him. What he really wants is to take revenge on all the people who have belittled him. As far as I've seen, Triumphant Penguin is the first comic that delves deeper into Oswald's youth. Here we see how several children tease him for his appearance and way of dressing, which made him cut one of their faces, and as a teenager they made fun of him, saying that no girl would want to go to the dance with him, so Oswald hired the most popular girl in school to be his date for $300, only to later blackmail her and ruin her social life. These new Penguin stories introduce several elements that would become crucial for the character's development. First is the tragic past in which he is discriminated against for his appearance, which makes us generate some empathy for the character. But we are also told that Oswald has always been a monster beyond his own tragedies. He will stop at nothing to seek revenge on those who have underestimated him, something that we can also see reflected in Tim Burton's Penguin. The version of Oswald Cobblepot played by Danny DeVito is one of the darkest we have seen of the character. This version moves away from the eccentric criminal we had seen up to this point in the comics and becomes a tragic and grotesque figure typical of Tim Burton's filmography. Here, Oswald is abandoned at birth by his parents due to his deformities and grows up in the sewers surrounded by penguins who take care of him but are unable to heal the abandonment and resentment Oswald feels towards the outside world. It deviates significantly from the comic's narrative so far. However, it preserves several key character traits. As like his comic counterpart, he is a character whose tragic past shapes his personality and leads him to seek revenge against those who rejected him. Recognition from others and personal goals often clash. Because at first his plan is to be accepted and recognized as mayor, but as his plans are frustrated, the hatred comes to the surface, so he sets out to end everything. This version was extremely transgressive for its time and to this day is one of the best adaptations of the character, in which we can see an eccentric character from the comics seen through the dark and tragic gaze of Tim Burton. In my view, Triumphing Penguin and Batman Returns, both released in the same year, defined the character for the coming decades. Subsequently, we saw other comics like The Penguin Returns from 1997, where we are told that his mother mistreated him, and the story of Joker's Asylum focused on the Penguin character. In this cruel origin of the Penguin, we see him being romantically rejected in his adolescence due to his appearance and how he eventually finds love in a young woman named Violet, whom he rescues from a human trafficking network. In this comic, the Penguin sincerely falls in love with Violet. She appreciates Oswald for saving her and starts a real relationship with him, unaware of his criminal background. Everything seems to be going well and Oswald even looks happy. But everything changed during a date at a restaurant when he saw the chef laughing. Maybe it was just a coincidence that the chef laughed while looking in the direction of the Penguin. Maybe he thought of something funny, some joke he heard. But in the end, it really didn't matter. Rage took over Oswald, who destroyed the chef's life. Days later, the building housing the restaurant got a new owner, leading to its closure and the dismissal of all staff. The day after losing his job, the chef found out that his girlfriend had been deported. His best friend was arrested for a crime he insisted he didn't commit. A new tenant moved in next to him and started blasting music all night long. His church was closed. The park where he liked to sit was demolished, and then the chef, who was a recovering alcoholic, found out that a 24-hour liquor store had opened right in front of his apartment. 2 months after meeting the Penguin, the chef was found at a station with a rope around his neck. Eventually, Violet discovered a folder that Oswald had where he collected newspaper clippings of obituaries of people whose lives had been mysteriously destroyed and confronted him. And in the end, the comic tells us that just as the Penguin had been able to take the life of one of his birds when it attacked him, he was able to return Violet to the same cage where he had found her. As Joker said at the end of this story, the Penguin always laughs last, but what he didn't understand is that he who laughs last usually laughs alone. If you notice then, the trend of the last decades has been to present the Penguin as this tragic character who, yes, has many wounds due to his past, but who commits acts so terrible, so cruel and calculating that not even his past excuses him from them. Another very detailed version of the character we see in the Gotham series. Robin Lord Taylor's Oswald Cobblepot begins as an underestimated, insignificant mafia subordinate. However, his cunning, his ambition, and his great ability to adapt gradually make him one of the most dangerous characters in the city. Someone who is capable of betraying anyone and allying with anyone in order to survive. This version reveals a cruel and visceral side of the character, while also showing his suffering and strong desire for love and recognition. I love this Penguin version, which keeps many theatrical and aesthetic elements from the comic. But we recently saw another version of the Penguin that is also super interesting. In 2022, the Batman movie was released, where we see a Penguin played by Colin Farrell under several layers of makeup. In this version, Oscorp, as they present him in the movie, is a charismatic and clever mafia lieutenant who works for Carmine Falcone and one of the few people who is not intimidated even when he has Batman in front of him. I love this version in the movie, but in the series they make the character shine even more. The Penguin series takes place shortly after the events of the Batman film, so a part of Gotham City is still devastated by the flood, and Oz is looking to exploit the recent deaths of Carmine Falcone for his personal benefit, which puts him in conflict with Sofia Falcone, Carmine's daughter, with the Maronis, and with many other gangs seeking to control drug trafficking and the power of Gotham City. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend this series. It's a gem, especially for their adaptation of Oz's character, as they take elements from the comic and craft a different narrative. Similar to the comics, Oz was underestimated as a child due to a disability in his legs and feet. He grows up admiring criminals like Rex Calabrese, because in his mind, power equals respect. He's a charismatic character who knows how to manipulate people, always knows what to say and how to survive, but who is not willing to be trampled on, so when he feels belittled, he immediately reacts with violence. Another point that is also similar to the comics is that, just like the Pride and Prejudice story, this Oz intentionally eliminates his brothers and ends up taking care of his mother. But I think what I liked most about this version of the character was the ability the writers had to make you empathize even a little with Oz. Because you as a viewer often wanted him to come out well off, even though they tell you he's always been a monster, someone who's not capable of redemption, a man without conscience or morals, who only relates to others as long as this relationship benefits him, since he was not even able to tell the truth to his mother to prevent her from losing a finger and leaves her alive in a vegetative state, even though he had promised her he wouldn't do it. I also found that selfish and extremely cruel. By the way, I recently uploaded a video to Instagram talking about how his relationship with Vic is similar to the relationship between Batman and Robin. The point here is that each version we see of the Penguin adds a layer of depth to the character. The Penguin is an atypical Batman villain who doesn't physically confront him. He is a mastermind who operates on the edge of legality and is clever enough to evade justice and continue operating his club for years. He's a character who started his journey as an eccentric criminal, but gradually became deeper and adopted more realistic tones through stories that allowed us to take a look at his youth. Not to empathize with him, but to show us that sometimes perhaps monsters are not made, but are born. He's a character who speaks of pain, rejection, desires to excel, and obsessions with power. Despite his size and shape, he is not intimidated even by the gaze of the Dark Knight. In a city plagued by monsters with powers, it is curious that one of the most cruel, sadistic, and dangerous villains is someone who does not have superhuman abilities, someone who has even been underestimated all his life. But there lies the great lesson of the character, in the fact that at first glance we cannot see how truly monstrous a person is, even if they look just like Oswald Cobblepot. Thanks for watching, Geekers! I hope you enjoyed these Penguin comics. Check out my similar Two-Face and Riddler analyses linked here. That's all for now. I'm Go. Keep looking beyond the obvious.